Advances in DNA technology are helping crack the most difficult cases.
And there's a private lab in Texas that's transforming how victims and suspects are identified. Othram Labs specializes in forensic-grade genome sequencing, a process that involves building a DNA profile from a tiny sample. Dr. Kristen Middleman says Othram helped uncover details that have been hidden for decades.
We worked the Opelika Jane Doe case out of Alabama. The skeleton was between 3 and 6 years old.
The lab identified her remains as Amori Wiggins. First, they found her father, but Dr. Middleman says he claimed he didn't have a child, so they used genealogy to find Amori's mother. And they learned she lost custody of her daughter at the age of 19.
The court thought that the child was safer with him. She was still paying child support to the father because she thought her daughter was still alive.
A police investigation then revealed what happened.
He brutally beat that child and killed her and continued to collect child support for 11 years after that. He confessed to murder. As a mother, that case got to me in a way that I can't describe.
There's another case that stays with Dr. Middleman, a case that seemed unsolvable in Texas.
Sherry Ann Jarvis, she was the Walker County Jane Doe. People knew her because this was one of the most horrific crimes against a child.
On Halloween Day in 1980, her body was found dumped on the side of a Texas highway.
She was mutilated so much that she was unrecognizable. There were no remains left by the time that we got involved in this case.
All they had was a small slide left from the autopsy that had a tiny amount of human tissue on it, treated with chemicals.
We worked diligently for almost a year on the research side of the lab with mock casework, mock DNA, to try to be able to work with that kind of input until we could. Then we moved it over to the forensic side of the lab and were able to give Sherry her name back.
Othram is now worldwide, making identifications in Canada, Australia, the UK, and other parts of Europe.
So just how do they do it? Reporter Brianna Whitney got an exclusive tour of the process.
This isn't like building a company or making an incremental change to something. This is like reinventing an entire field.
This is Othram.
Is anybody else in the world doing what Othram's doing?
Not that I know of. Not to this extent. I think we're going to actually see cold cases converge to extinction.
Kristen and David Middleman have a medical background and realized they could use their knowledge and expertise for forensic-grade genome sequencing. And that's what changed everything when it came to DNA identification. Just outside Houston, in the Woodlands, you'll find their lab, now sought after by law enforcement agencies across the world.
We've gone from people giving us the most impossible case to work, because this sounded like crazy science, a few years ago, to people actually giving us their entire backlog of cases.
Othram's work is now in headline after headline, but I wanted to go inside the lab to learn how this works. This is the definition of high tech, and the whole process is done under one roof, starting here.
This is our forensic lab here at Othram. There's a vestibule where they'll get dressed up, suited up from head to toe, so when they're working with this evidence, there's no contamination.
Step 1, DNA extraction.
Starts here with DNA extraction. As they move down, they cannot come back. They'd have to go home and shower for the day.
Step 2, the feasibility room.
We assess the properties of that DNA from that crime scene, and we decide on whether or not we're certain that we can actually build a DNA profile.
If not, they'll put it on a hold shelf and work to advance their own technology before trying it. Step 3, and one of the coolest parts.
This is our bone room. I think they're starting to work on a bone right now.
New evidence had just arrived that morning. The lab tech pulled out a femur right in front of us.
Now they're going to extract the DNA from that piece of bone.
They take pictures of everything.
These are all in case this ever goes to court. So she's documenting the whole process.
Step 4.
Where are we at here?
This is our library prep room. And now we're going to get the best pictures we can from that DNA that came from that crime scene.
DNA is transferred across the lab through a tiny door.
We will pass it through that little silver door
So it literally goes through that door.
It literally goes through the door, and people don't move because once they move, like I told you, it's unidirectional. They'll have to go home, shower, and come back.
So they're basically stuck in one room at a time until they fully...
Ready, committed to go to the next place.
Wow.
The last step of the forensic side, the DNA sequencer.
That is one of the most powerful sequences on Earth. It's taken the most powerful genomics techniques and applied them to forensics for the very, very first time. The blue is it's running. There's a cycle going right now. It's sequencing, and the green is it's pending the sequence.
That's where the next phase comes into play with Carla Davis, their chief genetic genealogist.
I got into genetic genealogy in 2016 when I was searching for my biological father.
She took a DNA test and found a third cousin match.
DNA is what brought him to life. Unfortunately, he's deceased, but that is what gave me the answers. After I identified my biological father, I was hooked.
Now, Davis is the key to the next part of solving these cold cases after the DNA is sequenced.
Once it's uploaded, then it comes to my department, and that's when the genealogists, they begin work on the case. We use DNA to discover the ancestors of the person that we're trying to identify.
They use 3 ancestry databases, GEDmatch, Family Tree, and their own, DNA Solves.
I work to identify all the siblings. The parent of match number 1 is actually a half sibling to this set of children.
She showed us the visual process of trying to find a familial match. Sometimes a distant match, even a 6th cousin, has cracked a case.
That was the one key match to pull the case together.
So it can be that crazy.
It can be that crazy.
And not all cases take the same amount of time to solve.
So the shortest time was about 2 hours.
And what's the longest you've dealt with?
We have a case going on a year.
Davis then gives the match to the law enforcement agency investigating the case as a lead, and it's up to them to confirm the identity Davis and her team have found of either a victim or a suspect. Othram has one shot to get this all right.
The DNA that is on here is put on a slide, so it's fixed on a slide, it's just liquid, and then that's consumed. That's why this test is a destructive process.
All the work is documented and tracked from beginning to end.
Does that make it much more likely to be admissible because you can show that chain of custody?
That's exactly right.
In 2019, Othram made 5 identifications total. In 2023, they've made more than 1,200 identifications, sometimes 5 in a day.
There are perpetrators out there that have been arrested or are in trial right now that are not able to harm their next victim.
All of the sudden, what they do behind the scenes is launched into the public spotlight. And then the emotional journey begins.
That's the purpose. Can you give someone their name back? Can you piece them back to their story, to what happened to them, and give their family the answers they need to move on?
Texas Senator John Cornyn wants to create grant funding in an effort to make this cutting-edge DNA analysis more widely available. The bill is called the Carla Walker Act. It's named for a Fort Worth native whose killer was found 46 years after her death with the help of this technology. He says the goal is solve more cold cases, bring families closure, and even exonerate the wrongly accused suspects. In Phoenix, Arizona, I'm Brianna Whitney.
Forensic investigative genetic genealogy works to find the closest relative. That's typically a third cousin. Genealogy websites estimate the average person has nearly 200 third cousins, but for a family in Missouri, a match was made through a victim's nephew.
The family was very mad at him.
Your uncle's sisters and his mother died thinking
Yes.
he was still out there.
Thinking that he was missing.
Thanks to the help of Othram, the family learned that was far from the case. To learn more about how DNA technology works and the surprising twist in the Missouri case, just head to investigatetv.com and search for forensic genealogy.